guest speakers here right now, much more interesting than freedom of speech, and they braved the weather. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
I'm going to give an introduction here.
Sure.
This is your mic.
Okay.
I'll get you mic'd up.
I can do that, I think.
Folks, I would like to introduce to you Rob Sand, who is a former Assistant Attorney General for the state of Iowa. Rob grew up in Decorah, Iowa, in northern Iowa, and he attended college at Brown University in Rhode Island. And after that, he was interested in working in the law, and he was accepted to a number of law schools, including Harvard Law School. But he chose to come back here to the University of Iowa College of Law, because this was home for him. And I was fortunate enough to have Rob as a student in my nonprofit organizational effectiveness class several years ago. It was kind of a large lecture class, sort of like this, so I didn't get to know everybody, but I got to know Rob because he came in and argued with me about his grade, and he won. So don't try this at home. You're not Rob Sand. No, he was a great student, and he had some really cool ideas about starting nonprofits and working in that field. After graduation from law school, Rob was hired as a prosecutor for the state of Iowa in the, as I said, the Attorney General's office. And while he was there, he tried a lot of cases, far more cases than I've tried in my legal career, and some really interesting cases and some really tough cases, almost all of which were felonies, some of them white-collar, but also some of them violent crime as well. And was with that office for several years and has recently left there to pursue some new ventures, which I hope he'll talk a little bit about as well. But I wanted to bring him here. We're not doing our criminal law module for a few weeks yet, but I thought you could hear from somebody who has really been in the thick of these kind of things, and to have his experience as a prosecutor in some of these really interesting cases, including the lottery case, which I've alluded to and have put up here. So I hope you would join me in welcoming Mr. Rob Sand to our class.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Got a little weird outside, as I can tell a lot of you can tell, judging by how wet your shirts are. I want this to be fun for you more than anything else, so I don't care what kind of a question you have. I would just rather you wave your hand around and ask it, and if I don't see you at first, you can just yell at me. I am happy to answer questions about literally anything. So I was in the Attorney General's office. I was in my 8th year when I left there. Prior to that, as Professor said, I was a law student at Iowa. I'm happy to tell you why you should not go to law school if you're thinking about going to law school. And whether you want to ask me about something related to LSAT or law school or what law school to go to or why you shouldn't go to law school, again, if I didn't mention that earlier, or the practice of law or the intricacies of any kind of aspect of criminal law, I would much rather answer questions that any of you have than just kind of stand up here and blab at you, okay? Does anybody have anything right now that's at the front of their mind that they're thinking about, law school related? How many people are in, who have we got here? Juniors, seniors?
We've got a lot of sophomores who are pre-business.
Okay.
And we have juniors and seniors from programs all across campus, including like engineering and liberal arts and everywhere else.
Okay. Will you raise your hand if you're thinking about going to law school? Okay. Has anybody already taken the LSAT? Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to start talking now, but I don't know if what I'm going to talk about is what you want to hear. So if you want to hear something, ask a question.
I'm happy to bring the mic to anybody in the back if you've got a question too.
Super. So when I was finishing up law school at Iowa, I had spent one of my summers at the Attorney General's office Didn't get paid for the work I was doing there, but I worked really hard. I got a good review. And during my 3L year at the law school, they asked me to work on a project for the Attorney General's office, which I did. Towards the end of the year in April, they asked me to come to Des Moines for a job interview, which I did. They then asked me what kind of law I was interested in prosecuting, because they were looking for someone to work on prosecutions. If you remember the Iowa Film Office tax credit scandal, I ended up prosecuting all of those criminal cases. And at the time when they were interviewing, they had a short-term position open for someone to work on those cases specifically. So when they asked me that question, I said the truth, which is I really want to prosecute white-collar crime. They said, why? I said, well, I think the people that commit white-collar crime, I think those crimes, I should say, are sort of especially reprehensible in a particular way, right? A lot of crime, and look, let's just say this and get out of the way. If you break the law, you ought to face the consequences, right? So every crime ought to be prosecuted. But there are different kinds of crimes. White-collar crime, financial crime, is committed by people who almost by definition are not desperate, right? They are not, it's not that they can't find a job, that they're really struggling to put food on the table for their family. They are almost by definition employed and trusted. They have access to money that they are choosing to embezzle for themselves because someone has given them a job, where presumably they have a paycheck, and because in addition to that, in that job they have access to funds as well, the money that they're stealing. And that bothers me. Again, all crime ought to be punished, but bothers me more than someone who can't find anything else to do and is really desperate to make money. Another contrast, it's not people who are in a fit of rage committing an act that they never would normally. People who are committing white-collar crime are week after week or month after month choosing in a moment of absolute sobriety to take something that does not belong to them and that very clearly does not belong to them. And that too is something that I find particularly reprehensible. Emotion isn't an excuse for a crime, but it helps it be more understandable. Similarly, as hopefully most of you know, inebriation is not an excuse for a crime, but sometimes it makes it more understandable. And so I said, I'd really like to work on white-collar crime because that's the stuff that, to me, I can get up in the morning and most eagerly go to work prosecuting because those people are doing things that really they have no excuse for doing at all. My boss, or my soon-to-be boss, said, great, because no one else was dumb enough to want to do that in Iowa. I'll explain why. In Iowa, don't write this down because I want you to forget it after I tell it to you. There's no amount of money that you can steal, at which point you have to go to prison. So you can steal $1 million in the state of Iowa, and if you get the right judge at sentencing, the judge can say, well, gee, if I put you in prison, you won't be able to pay this money back. So I guess I'll give you probation so that you can make these restitution payments of, $50 a month or something like that. I didn't know that at the time. Everybody else in the division knew that. And so these white-collar crimes are crimes that take a lot of work. They are more complex than your average crime. And at the end of it, you might go to trial for someone who committed a really terrible crime and then have the judge basically give them a slap on the wrist, right? So when this new young attorney came into the office and was like, I want to prosecute white-collar crime, everyone's like, great, here you go. Here's all my cases. You can take his too and hers too, and we're just going to give it all to you. Have fun. And I did have fun. I really enjoyed what I was doing for the time that I was there. I think one of the things that all of you as people who are interested in business ought to think about in that regard is assuming that your career paths take the path that you want them to, you probably are going to end up in a position similar to the people that I prosecuted. There are a lot of people in Iowa who were their hometown heroes, people that were well respected, that were appreciated where they lived, that had positions of trust and esteem in their community. And I indicted them and prosecuted them because they used that trust and that esteem to commit crimes, okay? It's a dangerous position to get in where you realize that people have so much trust in you and so much appreciation for you, and so clearly believe that you are a good person that would never do that, that all of a sudden people stop paying attention. There's a lot of stories I can tell in that regard. I prosecuted one woman who was the accounts manager for 2 different soil and water conservation societies. In one of them, in Powesheet County, the people who were on the board looked at the accounts regularly. So she knew, even though she was writing the checks and depositing the money, that someone was looking at it. Never stole a penny. Next door in Mahaska County, however, the people on that board were not looking at it. They just said, oh, well, Jessica's so nice. She's so trustworthy. She's a good person. She'd never steal. And so they didn't do their job. They trusted, and they didn't verify. And she robbed the Mahaska County Soil and Water Conservation District for over $200,000. I worked very hard and got her sent to prison, which sucked because she had an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. That's the part that comes into the criminal side of things. If you're thinking about law school, that you may want to think about that aspect on the criminal side. There isn't any case that happens in criminal law where at the end of it people are like, yay, so glad this happened. Because all of it is still fundamentally rooted in people doing terrible things to each other, and even the responses that we have and that are built into our law as a way to address those issues in themselves aren't particularly positive either. It's sort of taking something that's really, 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 really terrible and making it a little bit less bad. Not very happy work, not very optimistic work to do. There's other cases too. An attorney from a small town in southern Iowa who had come from a prominent family in that town 3 generations back. I think he was a 3-sport star athlete in high school, went to Iowa, might still have the single season batting average record here, I'm not sure. Went back again and was the city attorney. Just decided to start billing for more trials than what actually occurred every week, and ended up getting prosecuted for that. Had to repay his money, lost his law license, ended up pleading guilty after a trial in which he got convicted, then an appeal in which his conviction was overturned, and then pled guilty after that. So something to keep in mind, I think a lesson from my work looking out at all of you is everybody, no matter who you think someone is, every human being has the capacity to do things that would surprise you, given the right circumstances. Sometimes the only circumstances they need are a sense of trust and a sense of privacy, that nobody's paying attention, that nobody's looking. It depends person to person, but what I'm encouraging you to do is always be the person in that position that says, thanks so much, I'm sure you handled this appropriately. Please just make sure you provide the documentation so I can look at it and make sure that that's true. You don't have to be rude about it, but making sure that you're doing that is a really good way to represent whatever institution or employer you might end up working for, right? They're going to appreciate having someone there who doesn't just take people at their word, but asks them to show me, give me the documentation, let me know what you have been doing so I can actually see it rather than taking your word for it. I encourage you all, remember, trust but verify, right? That's a good thing to remember. It's a good practice to follow. I've been blabbing for a little while. Questions? Things you're thinking about in the future for you? Legal questions you're interested in? Bueller? Do you guys even get that joke anymore? All right, okay. There's a few, all right. I'll tell you about the lottery case. This is kind of crazy. And this actually also goes directly to trust in the institutions and in the people that you work with. My boss, as he was retiring, handed me a case that was basically like, I don't know. It's like a gag gift. Like, thanks. I opened it up. Great. Wonderful. It was this case of a $16 million lottery ticket that hadn't been claimed until 2 hours before the time claim was going to expire. So whoever had that ticket had it for an entire year, and not until the very last day, 2 hours before the offices were going to get locked and their claim was going to be lost, did they finally turn it in. The guy who claimed it said he had been the purchaser, but the Iowa Lottery knew that wasn't true because they had a videotape of the purchaser. The purchaser was not, like the guy who was making the claim, a 70-year-old man wearing a flannel sports coat. And there had been an investigation that ensued that basically had gone nowhere in about 2.5 years. My boss had been up to Canada to talk to that guy that made the claim. He had been down to Texas to talk to the guys that that guy in Canada said he got the tickets from. And that was about it. Not much else. And as he's retiring, he hands me this case and basically says, like, here, it's my parting. He might have actually called it a parting gift, come to think of it. And I was like, great, Tom. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. Because it was not going anywhere. It was just extra work that was going to distract me from my real cases that I was working on, which I was very busy with. And he said, I'm giving this to you because I know you're going to run out the rest of the leads. You're going to do what you're supposed to do to make sure we can put it to bed and be done with it. I said, okay, fine. And there was basically one thing left to do, which was release publicly the videotape of that purchaser. Because we had run out of other leads. There was almost nothing else to do other than to play that tape for the public and ask everybody out there, if you recognize this guy, let us know who you think it is. So we did a couple other things that we could do first, and then we released the tape. A guy in the state of Maine called up and he said, I think that's Eddie Tipton, which is really interesting because Eddie Tipton is a guy who works for the Multi-State Lottery Association. How many of you heard about this case, generally speaking? The guy that rigged the lottery jackpots? Okay. So Eddie Tipton, oops, spoiler alert. Eddie Tipton worked for the Multi-State Lottery Association. His job was actually to write the computer program that picks random numbers for lotteries. You can see why all of a sudden we thought, oh, that's sort of interesting. Might be the kind of person where if he bought that ticket, it might be worth $16 million to him not to have his identity disclosed, to just give up on the claim rather than have the lottery say, we need to know who bought the ticket. So we continue our investigation. We have a couple of other people who say, yeah, that looks like Eddie Tipton to me. Actually, not looks like, because it's a grainy video. More sounds like. Everyone is saying that voice is Eddie Tipton's voice. If you want to read this article, it's in the New York Times Magazine. If you're a fan of the TV show American Greed, it was just featured like on Monday of this last Monday, maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago. It's been pretty widely covered. So we had these people who were saying, that sounds like Eddie Tipton. So we sat down and interviewed Eddie Tipton. He said, no, I wasn't even in Iowa in that whole time frame that the ticket was born. And we did what I love to do, which is issue subpoenas to his bank and to his cell phone company to figure out the truth. So you can ask somebody what was going on, and then you can just check that against their records to see whether or not they're telling the truth. Turns out that his bank records showed him at the Super Walmart in West Des Moines, and his phone records show him making plenty of phone calls in Iowa on the day that the ticket's purchased. So now we have him caught in a very clear lie. Then we figure out something really crazy. The guy in Canada who made the claim pointed to the guy in Texas who just would never talk to anybody during the course of the investigation. Guy in Texas turns out to actually be the best friends with Eddie Tipton. What a coincidence, right? The odds of that are actually higher than winning the lottery. Like, it's more difficult for that to happen than someone to actually hit the jackpot, if you think about it. So once we put that connection together, which was done through some of Eddie's coworkers, we knew we had something pretty fascinating. And we knew that Eddie Tipton was clearly our guy. There's no way, there's too many coincidences for it to have been anyone other than Eddie Tipton buying that ticket. So we charge Eddie Tipton. Eddie Tipton does something very unusual in criminal procedure. He demands speedy trial. So under the U.S. Constitution, any one of you, if you're indicted with a felony, can demand speedy trial. And under the U.S. Constitution, you have a right to a trial within 1 year. In Iowa, there's an additional right that you have that's a statutory right. You can actually demand trial within 90 days. So you can say, no matter what the case is, once you are indicted, you want to have a trial 90 days from that date. And that's what Eddie Tipton did, which was extremely surprising. Nobody ever does that in Iowa, and almost no matter what the crime is that they're charged with, because you want to give your own defense attorney time to figure out what's going on. It's particularly unusual and unheard of in a case where it's actually a very complex set of facts. There's a lot of wrinkles to it, and we had really no idea what was going on. So we were trying to investigate the crime at the same time that we were sort of trying to litigate the crime, which is also harder to do than knowing everything that happened and finishing your investigation and then moving ahead. But we had indicted him because the statute of limitations was going to run, and we didn't really have a choice. So we just went ahead and did it. Over the next 3 months, we run an investigation basically trying to figure out whether or not he actually fixed the outcome, right? We figure out that the draw room where those numbers are drawn, which is like launching a nuclear missile in terms of the level of security, the cameras that record that room all the time weren't actually working about a month before the draw when he was physically in the draw room. So instead of recording every minute of it, you saw about 1 second out of every 80 seconds. So he'd be here, then he'd be there, then he'd be over here. Awfully suspicious that he was even in the draw room to begin with because he doesn't go in there very often. So we put together a pretty good case on why we believed that he had rigged this jackpot, rigged this outcome. We did not, though, have the electronic evidence from the computer showing that he had done it. That was because the computers had been wiped to Department of Defense standards 3 times. That was the standard operating procedure for the Multi-State Lottery Association when they pulled him out of service, which they had done. So we weren't able to actually look at the computer and say, see, this is what he did to fix it. His friends, who he worked with, who had been his friends for years, his closest friends, were able to tell us how he could have. Eddie Tipton is incredibly bright, they say. He could absolutely do that 6 ways from Sunday if he wanted to. Lots of different ways he could pull that off. He had the access to the machines to do it. He had the know-how to do it. And he had the opportunity, right? But we didn't actually have the hard electronic evidence that we wanted. We go up to our trial date in April. The defense attorney tries to kick a bunch of our new evidence out that we had discovered over the course of that 3 months, fails. He then waives speedy trial and asks the judge to continue trial. To which I say, no thanks. We have all of our witnesses here. We have this guy, Michael Boardman from the state of Maine. He flew here. I don't really want to have to buy him another ticket later. Let's do this thing. Judge says, no, I'm going to give Eddie more time. So bumps trial another 3 months. At which point, Eddie does something even more extraordinary. He reasserts speedy trial. So he waives speedy trial, says, Judge, I don't need a trial right now. Give me a continuance, a postponement. Judge says, okay. Eddie says, thanks. Then like 2 days later, he says, I want speedy trial within the new 90-day period, which takes the control out of my hands to determine the pace at which this investigation can proceed. Big reason why Eddie Tipton wants to do that, I'm thinking, there's more that he doesn't want us to learn, right? This guy has been in his job for 10 years. Another thing about financial crime committed against institutions and committed against employers by people who are trusted, they don't get caught the first time they do it. Almost never, ever do they get caught the first time they do it. They're incredibly careful. They make sure they're being really, really good about what they're doing. And so they steal, and they steal a little more, and they steal a little more, and they steal a little more. And then eventually, they get sloppy. And then they get caught after they're doing just absolutely crazy things that are really taking advantage of the position that they have. And so you consider that fact, that people never get caught the first time. Then you consider the fact that our defendant in this case is limiting our ability to investigate. Clearly, we're thinking there's a lot more out there than what he wants us to know about, or what we do know about. But we also, again, only have 3 months to investigate. We are really focused on what I like to say is shooting the alligator closest to the boat, right? We know about this one ticket. Most important thing we can do right now is win a trial about this one ticket, and that's it. So we head out to our next trial date in July. CBS this morning runs a nationwide broadcast saying that I don't have the evidence I need to get a conviction in the case. We have a week-long trial. The jury comes back the next Monday, finds Eddie Tipton guilty as charged. So 2 convictions in that case. Normally there's about a 6-week to 2-month period in between a jury having a guilty verdict and then the judge giving someone a sentence in a case like this. In that time frame, I have 2 other trials that I'm handling. I'm also hoping that Eddie is going to sit down with us and tell us everything that happened. because I had made that offer originally. We had plea discussions, so what I always said was, I can't resolve this case if Eddie doesn't want to sit down and tell us everything that happened and be truthful about it. And he wasn't ever willing to do that, and so we ended up going to trial, even though we were looking at the trial thinking, it's not the best evidence, we might lose this one. But about a week before sentencing happens, I get a phone call from this guy in Texas. He says, hey, did you guys know Eddie Tipton's brother won the lottery? Like 10 years ago? Out west somewhere, maybe in Colorado? I said, no, I didn't know that. Thank you for that tip. That's very helpful. And we start digging around. Turns out his brother never actually claimed a ticket in Colorado, but his brother's best friend, this is where it starts to get even weirder, did. His brother was a cop in Texas. He'd been a police officer for a long time, then was a justice of the peace, kind of like a magistrate here in Iowa. His brother was also a Bigfoot hunter. Like, really thinks Bigfoot is real and goes out in the woods to set up cameras and try to take pictures of Bigfoot. And so his brother, 10 years earlier, had apparently not claimed a ticket himself, but had one of his Bigfoot hunting buddies go in and claim the ticket for him. And he did that by telling his Bigfoot hunting buddy, hey, I won the lottery, $500,000, awesome. But my wife and I are kind of on the outs. And I don't want my wife to know about the money because I want to keep it all for myself because I think we're going to get a divorce. So if you claim the ticket so that it can't get traced to me by her, I'll let you keep 10%. And so his buddy's like, $50,000. $50,000 to help you lie to your wife? Okay. And that's what happened. Crazy story about that. And this is one of the things, and this is, again, it's a good cautionary tale for all you youngsters, okay? Which I can call you because I'm 36, all right? Are you guys millennials? Or are you too young?
Too young.
You're too young? All right. I am. I'm like a grandpa millennial. I'm barely there. If you were to wander off that path of doing good things and making the right decisions, you will screw up. You will screw up in ways where you think you're being clever, and you don't even realize until much, much later that when you thought you were being clever and smart, you were actually screwing up. That's what Tommy Tipton did, Eddie Tipton's brother. Let me tell you how. It's a good cautionary tale. Tommy thought, so Tommy's friend, Alexander, who claimed this ticket, his Bigfoot hunting buddy, lived in such a rural area of Texas that when he went to his credit union and asked them to cash this $500,000 check, they said, we don't have $500,000. We're going to have to call the Fed, get them to send us some new money, and then in like 3 days when we get all that new money, then you can come in and pick up your money. Alexander says, okay, cool. So that's what happens. Alexander then takes all that newly minted, still in the bands, fresh, crisp, consecutively marked bills to Tommy Tipton, the brother, and Tommy freaks out. He's like, oh no, they're going to trace this money to me. Just really, really stupid thought, right? Because why would they even trace the money to you in the first place? This is a jackpot ticket that a guy named Alexander Hicks claimed in Colorado. You live in Texas. Your brother doesn't work for the Colorado lottery. He works for a vendor to the lottery in the state of Iowa. They're not going to try to trace the money to you. There's no reason that anyone even thinks this is suspicious at all. But Tommy thinks he's really smart. And he says, I could be in real trouble if I go around spending money that's got consecutively marked bills. I better not do that. So he goes to this guy who's a fireworks dealer. How long have we got still here? Because we're only like a third of the way through the story here. All right. So Tommy goes to this guy who's a fireworks dealer that he trusts. Fireworks.
That seems like an oxymoron.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, right. I know. Goes to the fireworks dealer, is like, hey man, I have some consecutively marked bills that I would really like to trade to you for some of your not consecutively marked bills. Fireworks dealer's like, cool, let's meet later. And then goes and talks to the FBI immediately and says, there's a guy who's a justice of the peace here, and this is in like relatively southern Texas, close to the border, this justice of the peace, who makes about $40,000 a year, has $500,000 in consecutively marked bills and wants me to launder money. FBI says, interesting, thanks for the tip. We would love to work with you on this. Fireworks dealer says, cool, let's do it. So they have him wear a wire. We have this video of him like opening the suitcase full of money and talking about trading the money out. And the FBI is digging in and looking around and trying to figure out where the money's coming from. Obviously, the natural assumption is that he is a crooked cop, crooked justice of the peace, working with drug cartels, right? Because they're in relatively southern Texas, closer to the border, and it's a lot of money, cash, consecutively marked. But they can't figure out what the connection is. And so finally the cops go and interview Tommy Tipton, the brother. While they interview him, he is lying in a hospital bed. Anybody want to guess how he ended up in a hospital bed? Not a car crash. Funnier than a car crash. Fireworks is a good guess, and that would be funny too. Close. That's the closest you can get. That's the closest you can get. He literally fell out of a tree while Bigfoot hunting and broke, I think, both of his legs. So he's lying in bed, and this FBI agent comes in to talk to him and interview him, and is like, where did you get all this money? And he goes, I won the lottery in Colorado. FBI agent is like, oh, why are you trying to launder it then? That's weird. Tommy Tipton's like, oh, I just don't want my wife to notice that it's consecutively marked. FBI agent's like, okay. But they don't know what to do other than to say, well, let's continue our investigation. So they continue their investigation, which is a money laundering investigation, right? That's what he is trying to do. If you have money that you got illegally and you try to move it in a way to make it look like you got it legally, that's a new crime, money laundering. But they verify with the Colorado lottery that this was, in fact, winnings from a lottery ticket, that Alexander Hicks, his friend, did claim it, and none of this is illegal because they don't know about his brother working in Iowa. So they close their investigation basically saying, like, boy, this Tommy Tipton is really a weirdo. I don't know why you'd want to try to trade money with a fireworks dealer, but you and your wife, whatever you guys have going on, it's not a crime. I'm going to leave that to you. So the FBI walks away from the case, and Eddie and Tommy Tipton are like, let's do it again. And so they do it again. This time he does it with his best friend, though, Robert Rhodes. This is interesting because Robert Rhodes is the guy who, remember the guy in Texas that originally tried to claim the Iowa ticket? When he said, I got it from these guys excuse me. Do you remember the guy in Canada, flannel sports coat, tried to claim the ticket? When the guy in Canada said, I got it from these guys in Texas, he pointed the finger at Robert Rhodes, the guy who just so happened to be best friends with Eddie Tipton. So when that happened, and we knew that Robert Rhodes was involved, we had been trying to apply a lot of pressure to Robert Rhodes to get him to come testify against Eddie Tipton at this trial that we had about the one Iowa ticket. He didn't want to do it. Now we know more about why, right? Because he knew if he came down and talked to us, he was going to have to spill the beans on everything because we're not going to take anything less than the full truth. And then he'd have to tell us about this Wisconsin ticket, which we clearly at this point being back in the trial for the first ticket, didn't know about. Following? All right. So Robert Rhodes had not been cooperative. Another example of why that trial was thin odds, but we were able to prevail anyways. But after that Colorado ticket, Eddie goes to his best friend, Robert. Robert had really been like a high-flying businessman in the Houston business community and recently had his net worth of his company literally fall off a cliff, like straight down, totally plummet. And so he had fallen on tough times, and Eddie said, hey, I think I got a way out of these tough times for you. Here's a list of numbers. You should go up to Wisconsin and buy a bunch of lottery tickets. And Robert Rhodes is like, okay. You know, he's not saying like, I fixed the lottery, here's exactly how I did it. You're going to get a guaranteed jackpot. But Robert is smart enough to know that his friend works on computers for the lottery and he's telling him to buy these specific tickets. And you can figure it out, right? Filling out the gaps in between. So Robert goes up to Wisconsin, wins a jackpot off the numbers that Eddie tells him to buy, claims it through an LLC to make it a little bit more difficult to trace it to him. Eddie then buys the Iowa ticket. On the same day, buys 2 more tickets in Kansas. He's driving from Iowa to Texas for Christmas. This is on December 23rd, 2010. So before he leaves Iowa, he buys a ticket in Iowa that's a $16 million winner. And then for some weird reason, stops in Kansas to buy 2 jackpot-winning tickets that are each worth $22,000. Just like a weird thing to do, right? You just won $16 million bucks, and you're going to take these additional big risks just for an extra 30 grand? Seems weird. But again, this is why you don't want to do these things, right? The further down you go down that road, you get overconfident, you think no one's going to figure it out, and you start making dumb mistakes. Eddie buys these tickets in Kansas. When he's in Texas, gives one to a high school classmate, a buddy of his. He's like, hey, here's my ticket. I won it. I shouldn't claim it because I worked for the lottery doing security stuff, but you could claim it, and let's split it. We'll each get 8,000 bucks. His friend's like, okay, cool. Doesn't know that Eddie's job is doing the computer side of things. Thinks that Eddie, thinks that Eddie as director of security is basically like a security guard, right? Not digital security, but just like regular, like don't go over here security. Goes back to Iowa, gives the other ticket to a woman he had gone on a date with once when they met on plentyoffish.com. They stayed friends, only one date, and she had recently gotten engaged. And so Eddie posed this to her as an engagement present. Hey, congratulations, I'm really happy for you. I just won this lottery ticket. I can't really claim it because I work for the lottery, and that's kind of awkward. It was just totally random that I won it. But I'm really happy for you getting engaged, and I just thought I'd like to give you half of it. If you go claim it in your name, you can take all the taxes out up front and then give me half back in cash, and you can have an $8,000 engagement gift. And his friend said, sweet, 8,000 bucks, okay. Also hands the Iowa ticket for $16 million to Robert Rhodes. Meanwhile, a little bit before the Iowa claim period expires, right? So remember how I mentioned there's this year-long period? Is anybody falling asleep? Is anybody next to somebody you point out if there's somebody next to you falling asleep? All right. I know it's kind of confusing, but it's kind of interesting, right? You're laughing, so I know it's interesting. So there's this year-long claim period that they have to claim the Iowa ticket. About 10 months into that, Eddie goes for it again, this time in the state of Oklahoma, where he has his brother, Tommy, the same guy that claimed the Colorado ticket, go to Oklahoma to do some Bigfoot hunting with his friend Billy. Billy is the kind of guy that the guys on Duck Dynasty and would look at and be like, that guy's for real, right? Like, Billy literally lives in the bayou 40 miles from a cell tower. Like, there's no service. There's not even close to service. Every time we tried to call him for an interview, we'd have to call his cousin. His cousin would have to, drive or, take a boat to Billy's house, tell Billy that we wanted to talk to him, and then we would have to set up a time at a future point to call him on a different number when he would be somewhere next to a phone in a place that had signal. Real redneck, which I can say because I'm part redneck myself. That's not a slur. It's just, I'm a little bit redneck, and Billy's a lot of redneck. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a way to live. Billy goes out to Oklahoma, does the ticket buying thing with Tommy, but then Billy also has a reason that he doesn't want to claim it that Tommy didn't know about. He's like, I'm on disability. If I claim this ticket, they're going to take my disability away. So let's get my cousin to claim it. So now they get another person involved. This other person, Kyle, not a member of the Brotherhood of Bigfoot Hunters, which I think, my take on this is, I think he was a Bigfoot hunter because he knew that those people would be pretty trustworthy, right?
I have a story about that later. But yeah.
Oh, all right, okay. So I don't think that Tommy was ever really about Bigfoot hunting. He was more about finding people who would believe any BS story that he would tell them in order to get them to claim lottery tickets for him. So I think that's the story there. Problem is with Billy didn't want to do it because he's on disability, so then he goes to Kyle. The problem with Kyle is Kyle's not in the Brotherhood. Kyle isn't in the circle of trust of Bigfoot hunters. And so when we call Kyle, so I'm sitting at my parents' house. I grew up in, anybody from Decorah? Yes. What year did you graduate? Oh my God, it's crazy. Graduated 2001. So I was sitting up at my parents' house in Decorah. This is when we're working on the investigation. I'm just doing Control F, Control F, Control F, looking for phone numbers that belong to lottery claimants in Tommy Tipton's phone records, right? So we got Tommy Tipton's phone records. We have all these records of people who claimed lottery tickets from all around the country over the last decade. 45,000 winning tickets. We didn't do Control F for every one of them. We just did the ones that were most likely. And I'm sitting at my parents' house in the living room in Decorah when, bing, I get a hit. I'm like, great. It happens to be Kyle's phone number. Kyle is the cousin of Billy. We call up Kyle. Kyle doesn't, because he's not a part of the circle of trust, doesn't know that this is a thing that he shouldn't talk to anyone about. And he's like, yeah, my cousin Billy won this jackpot with some guy named Tommy Tipton, and they just asked me to claim it for him because they both had reasons they didn't want to claim it. I was like, great, thanks. Will you continue to say that every time we ask you that question, if it's the truth? He says, yes, okay, good. So now we have another ticket that we've located. We find the woman in Iowa who was the Plenty of Fish friend. We find the guy in Texas who was the high school jackpot buddy that got that one. We finally get Robert Rhodes to cooperate. Me, my investigative agent on the case, and then authorities from Wisconsin fly to O'Hare and interview Robert Rhodes to have him tell us lay out everything that happened. And then Wisconsin actually has a different standard operating procedure than Iowa. When Wisconsin took the machines out of use that had drawn that jackpot, they didn't wipe them. So they were actually able to analyze the machines and see exactly what it was that Eddie did to make the lottery predictable. And what he did was he just inserted a little bit of code that said, if this draw is occurring on May 19th, November 23rd, or December 29th, and that date is a Wednesday or a Saturday, and the time of day is after 8 p.m., then rather than using a little piece of radioactive material within the computer to draw a seed for the random number generator, use this 7-variable formula to draw a seed for the random number generator. Now Eddie, as the guy who does security for lotteries all over the country, knows what that 7-variable formula is. He knows in every state, so depending on where that ticket's being drawn, he knows what those variables are probably going to be. And so he can predict with a really good degree of certainty what the seed for the pseudo-random number generator will be. Because it's a pseudo-random number generator, not quite a perfect one, because they were cheap. Once he knows the seed, he knows there's a pretty narrow range of numbers that are going to result. And so he can go out and buy 5 tickets or 200 tickets and know that one of them is going to be a jackpot ticket. So we got that whole thing figured out. And I think for all of you, it's a really fascinating story. But the craziest thing is, from your perspective sitting there in this classroom today, Eddie's best friends were the people that he worked with. Ed Steffen is a guy who literally had Eddie stand up in his wedding. They had met down in Texas. They became really good friends. Ed got Eddie the job at the Multi-State Lottery Association, stood in Ed's wedding. They actually bought a chunk of land together south of Des Moines, split it in 2, and each built houses on it. And he screwed this guy for a decade, was rigging these lottery jackpots, and Ed never had any idea. Eddie would just go to work and do his thing, and everybody trusted Eddie. Jason Maher, another guy that worked with Eddie, who trusted Eddie deeply. In that case, it's the reverse. Eddie got Jason his job at Muscle. They used to hang out at this sushi restaurant in Des Moines, Taki, if you've ever been there. Nice little piece of history for you next time you walk in the doors. You can imagine Eddie Tipton and Jason just sitting there shooting the shit. And someday Eddie says, Jason, you should come work for us at Muscle. We have a lot of good work for you to do, and you're a good computer guy. You could do a great job for us. Jason's like, great. These guys are like best friends. And Eddie has these secrets that not only affect his own life, but affect the integrity of the work that these guys are doing day in and day out, right? Jason and Ed Steffen weren't a part of any of this. They're going to work every day assuming that everyone on that team that they work with is trying to do the same thing, which is just make the lottery work the right way. Meanwhile, this guy is sitting over here who they would never guess that for an entire decade is violating every little piece of trust that they put in him. Crazy, right? Crazy. Which again, is why I come back to, I think this is a good cautionary tale. I mean, you look at financial crime of any sort, it always comes down to people who trust other people, who probably because of laziness don't want to do the extra work to actually make sure that that person is doing only what they're supposed to do and not other things, right? Because it's a little extra work to look at the books. It's a little extra work to look at the bank statements. I don't want to look at the bank statements. You're fine. I trust you. Well, those are the decisions that people later on can take advantage of, right? It's very important to do the work to figure out what is going on there. And again, if you're the kind of person that does that work, that demands that level of verification, you are going to be appreciated in your employment, and you're probably going to have better opportunities because of it. That's most of the lottery story. I'm leaving out a lot of details, even though I just went on for a very long time.
I have so many questions, but I'm
okay,
hoping
good.
Maybe some of you guys might have some questions. Anyone?
You can just shout. So
The crime you charged him with.
in the first trial, the crime we charged him with when we only knew about the 2 Iowa tickets was 2 counts of fraud. It's kind of an esoteric statute. It's actually not in the criminal code, it's in the lottery code, and so it's lottery-specific fraud. After that, when we saw that he was doing this repeatedly, we charged him with what's called ongoing criminal conduct. In Iowa, this is also a good cautionary tale, in Iowa, if you commit an indictable offense, but you do it more than twice, 3 times or more, and you're doing it for financial gain, you can be charged with a B felony, which is up to 25 years in prison. Now, in the Attorney General's office, we kind of had a rule of thumb that until you were stealing over $100,000, we didn't hit you with ongoing criminal conduct. But I have seen county attorneys who have charged it in cases where someone stole less than $10,000. There was actually a case where a woman was stealing from the Girl Scout troop that she was like administering or handling. It was a pretty awful crime, but it wasn't even over $2,000, and still the county attorney charged that individual with a Class B felony. So first case, 2 counts of fraud. Second case, ongoing criminal conduct, and I forgot, money laundering.
I've got another question back here.
Okay, so the other people who didn't know about the money yet, they still were able to obtain the money because of Eddie and his best friend or brother. Were they held liable for any of it? Did they have to return any of the money or find ways to pay back what they were given?
Yeah, good question. They were not held criminally liable. So one level of liability would be civil liability, where you're looking at a financial loss. You got to repay the money with interest. The other level would be criminal liability, where you have to repay the money with interest and you're looking at serving time. None of these people knew that what they were doing was a crime, right? I mean, the Tipton brothers and Robert Rhodes intentionally kept people in the dark, which makes a lot of sense. Why would you tell someone, hey, I rigged the lottery, right? Just tell them something easy to get them to do what you want to do, because every other person that you tell you're actually committing a crime to, you're just adding your own exposure, right? That's one more person who knows the conspiracy that could potentially damage you later. And so those people, they didn't know it was criminal. They didn't get held criminally liable. The nice lady on plentyoffish.com, she got sued by the state of Kansas. So did the high school classmate. They ended up both getting sued in the state of Kansas. But in the criminal case, we held Eddie and Tommy responsible for the chunks of money that those people got, right? If I go rob a bank, and then to help get rid of the money, I say to you, hey, here's $5,000. You didn't know I robbed the bank. I know I did, and so I should be still held responsible for that money. So that's what we did in that case.
Great question. Thank you. Well, I'm in the back of the class here. Anybody have more questions? Follow-up question.
So with the whole speedy trial process in Iowa, you said it's different. They get up to 90 days to have the trial. So if that isn't enough time to investigate and you end up losing that trial because of that circumstance, but after the trial you have more time to investigate and you find more leads that could in a way convict him, could you go back and sue him again? Or
that's an intelligent question, because if you had asked me if I could charge him again criminally, the answer would be no. Double jeopardy in the Constitution says that no one can be tried for the same crime twice. So if I charge somebody too early and I don't have enough evidence, we go to trial and I lose, then I get more evidence, I cannot go back and charge them with the same crime. If I go back and I find out that what they did is a piece of another crime, I could charge them with that larger crime. So let's say, for example, I charge them with one, I lose, but then I find 2 or 3 more. I can charge them with ongoing criminal conduct that includes all of them. So there's a criminal charge in these specific circumstances that would apply. But to specifically answer the intelligent part of the question, could I go back and sue them? Yes. Could go back and sue them. I'd be pretty embarrassed, though, from having lost and then having to come back again later and say, well, I got it figured out now, but I guess all I can get is the money. We do have a question right down here.
How much did Eddie take altogether?
So Eddie's walking away. So the face value of all these tickets, $25 million. The Iowa ticket was never paid because the Iowa lottery said, we don't know who bought this ticket. We don't know much about it. We want to know more. We're not paying it out. So they never paid it out. And then with all the other ones, they took all the taxes out up front. So they got the lower payday. The total walking away money for all of the tickets, no matter who the money went to, I want to say it was $2.5 or $3.5 million. Not as much as if the Iowa ticket had been paid out. Yeah. And Eddie spread that around, shared it with his co-conspirators. He had a very nice house. All his friends said he always had, you could open up like any drawer in his house, cash. Cash in this drawer, cash in that drawer. He told them that he didn't like people like knowing what transactions he was committing, so he liked to spend money in cash. Kind of true.
We call that a red flag, I think.
Yeah, red flag. Yeah. We do call that a red flag. If you have friends that do that, red flag.
Red flag. Questions here?
There's one way in the back there.
So what sentence did he get?
He's in Clarinda Correctional Facility right now. He is in there for up to 25 years.
Wow.
I would be surprised if he serves more than 7 on that sentence. In Iowa, if you commit a non-forcible felony, meaning you didn't hit anybody, generally speaking, or you didn't have physical contact with somebody, you will have a indeterminate sentence, and there's no mandatory minimum. You get good time credit of about 60%, so the maximum he could serve there would be 10 years, assuming that he's a good boy and behaves himself. Beyond that, the Board of Parole is just pushing people out as soon as they can. If he served more than 7 years, I'd be really surprised. If he served 5 years, I'd be like, yeah, seems about what would be ordinary given these circumstances. When's your class over?
Technically 3:15. Sometimes I let them out a little bit
Okay.
late, or a little early. I'm sorry, not late. They wouldn't care for that. But we've got time for some more questions. I've got some, but I'd rather.
There's one up in the back there.
Why do you recommend against law school?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. I have a lot of answers to it. Law school still is structured in the way that it was structured in the 1930s and the 1920s. In the 1930s and the 1920s, you'd walk up to the registrar's desk and say, hello, my name's Rob Sand. I would like to attend law school, please. Here's my $2 for tuition. And they would say, thank you, Rob Sand. Class begins in 20 minutes. Here's your book. And that was it. There wasn't the LSAT. There wasn't the GPA. There were no standardized tests, no essays to apply. And so lawyers made law school really shitty, right? You can say shitty, right? We're all adults here.
You can say that.
They made it really shitty on purpose because they wanted to get rid of all the dumb people that couldn't cut it, right? All the people that they didn't think were smart enough to be lawyers. So now we have the LSAT, we have GPAs, we have all of this stuff, but they still haven't redesigned the experience of law school. I always say that my first 2 years in law school were my worst 2 years of my life, which, number one, boo-hoo, poor me, right? Really wasn't that bad. It's a good indication of how I've had a pretty nice life, but it's just not fun. You take one test at the end of the semester. That test is placed on a mandatory curve. If a professor makes a test super easy and like everybody aces it, the professor literally has to manufacture differences between the tests in order to fit everyone onto the curve. That's stupid. Conversely, if they make a test really hard and everybody screws it up and is down at the far end, they still have to manufacture differences in between everyone's performance in order to put them on a curve. Okay? It's weird. Doesn't really seem fair. Also, when you only have one test at the very end of the semester, by the time you get your grade, you're like, great, wish I had known all that stuff better. Too bad I don't have an opportunity to study it anymore. I guess I'll just move on. It's not a very good way to teach people. There's no forced recall up until the very end. There's no opportunity to look back and see what you screwed up. So, number one reason not go to law school, unpleasant experience, okay? Not fun. Number two reason, legal economy. Big crash in 2008, right? The legal economy was actually the hardest hit sector of the economy. A higher percentage of lawyers lost their job during the downturn than any other profession. In addition to the legal downturn, a lot of software programs started coming out that replaced the work that a lot of lawyers were doing. So for years, if you were in a law firm, you, for your first couple of years, would do what's called document review. They would literally say, like, hey, we need to find every document that says the word Hawkeyes. And so you'd go in there and you'd just look at document after document after document all day doing doc review. As would surprise nobody in this room, that is no longer something that attorneys do because computers do that for a much lower charge, right? So law school is no longer the guaranteed meal ticket to like an upper middle class or upper class income that it used to be either. In addition to that, depending on where you go, it can be expensive. Professor mentioned that I turned down Harvard in order to go to Iowa. True story. One reason was the people I met at Harvard didn't exactly impress me all that much. Number two, I knew I wanted to live in Iowa. I knew I wanted to take a low-paying job because I wanted to do public service work. And actually, my best friend in Decorah that delivers full-time at Mabes, redheaded guy, kind of short. You probably know him. He made more money delivering pizza full-time than I made in my first year at the Attorney General's office. True story. So I went to Iowa because I knew that going somewhere where I didn't have to pay tuition, because I had a full ride there, would mean I could take a job like that when I graduated. I didn't want to go to Harvard because I was going to have like $150,000, $200,000 in debt when I graduated. What am I going to do with that? Right? It would have been great if I wanted to go work in a really big city in a very tall building for a really big company. Then people would have been like, oh, you went to Harvard, great. We don't need to know anything else. You're in. But that's not what I wanted to do. And unless you can say with clarity what it is you want to do, that's another reason not to go. So number one, not fun. Number two, not guaranteeing a decent income anymore, / costing you debt. And then I lost my train of thought. What was number three? Where was I going with that? It's right there. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I did not sleep well last night. I blame them.
I hear you. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Those are both good reasons, though. Yeah.
I remember now. Lack of clarity being number three. A lot of people don't really know what you do with a law degree. You go there, you go to school, and then you're like, great, I can be a lawyer now. Or they think everybody wants a lawyer on their team. No matter what it is you want to do, having a law degree is a great qualification. Not really true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good qualification for being a lawyer. and not really for a lot of other things. Because for a lot of the other jobs, they don't want to pay you enough to afford someone who has that debt load that you have as a lawyer. They're just looking for someone that wants to do this job without the law stuff on the side. And I think for a lot of people, they go and they think, well, I want to practice constitutional law. Wrong. There's like 3 people in the country that practice constitutional law. You probably know their names. Other than that, that's not a thing that you can do. You can be a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, in which case almost all of the legal issues that you encounter in your cases will have to do with the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. But beyond that, you can't really be a constitutional law professor. So what I usually tell people is, if you are absolutely convinced that you have to go to law school, number one, first, is everybody paying attention right now? You on the computer, look at me. Don't look down at the computer, look at me, okay? No, you, I'm looking at you.
Cat video.
Ready for this? He's looking at cat video?
Probably.
Okay, here's the thing. Whatever you do, this is for all of you, whatever grad school you go to, whether it's law school or something else, do something else first. Okay? Get a job. If you want to take the LSAT or take the GRE or whatever first, go ahead, but do something else first. Here's why. You're going to get into better schools. You are going to get better financial aid packages. Trust me on this. You are also, here's the other piece of it, you might actually figure out that you like doing the thing that you're doing and that work experience is actually more valuable than another degree for you. I'm not discouraging you from going to any grad program. I'm saying do it the right way, right? Why would you not get 2 years of work experience so that you could get into the school you really want to go to, or so that you could go to one of the schools you really want to go to and have it cost you less money? It's like a no-lose proposition. I also think when you're in grad school, when I was in law school, you could literally pick the people out that went straight through from undergrad versus the people who took time off. There's just a difference in maturity level where if you're in that program when you've worked a little bit, you'll have a much better idea of what classes you should take versus the ones you just find interesting, that kind of thing. But for law school specifically, I always say, if you really are totally convinced, you've taken time off, you had a job for a year or two, you still really want to go, you should be able to say specifically what kind of law you want to practice, not constitutional law. That's not an answer. It could be criminal law, it could be, and civil rights law also. Sorry. That's a tough one. There are people who practice civil rights law, few and far between. Not a lot of jobs doing that. Environmental law. Odds are, if you really want to practice environmental law, guess who you're going to go work for? Oil and gas companies, because that's who has a lot of money to hire environmental attorneys. There are exceptions to this. One of my best friends from law school works for the Environmental Law and Policy Center in Des Moines. But I want you all to have your eyes open in terms of what you're getting into. So you should have a really good idea about what kind of law you want to practice. Maybe in your time off you go work at a law firm. And you should really seriously consider going to a school where you don't have to take on a debt burden that is going to limit your options in the future. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, great question.
Get down off my soapbox now.
I wanted to ask you one question, Rob, if I could maybe kind of conclude with this one. And I hope it's not a weird question, but I read this article a couple times, and at the end of it, it had a quote, and who knows if you actually even said it or if it was just a dramatic way to end it, but it was something about you've decided to move on from the Attorney General's office because you were chasing monsters and you felt you might become one if you chased monsters long enough. Some kind of quote of that nature in one of these articles. Is it true, and can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. There's another thing about practicing law that I never really thought about, and it really has to relate mostly to criminal law. It's really dark. I was kind of getting into this earlier, but when you're a criminal prosecutor, you wake up in the morning and all you think about every day is terrible things that people have done to each other. Sometimes the worst things. I prosecuted about 20 sexually violent predator civil commitment cases. These are cases where we take the worst of the absolute worst sexual offenders in the state of Iowa who have repeat offenses, and we try to get them, just as they're getting released from prison, committed to a treatment facility where they're housed in a secure facility getting treatment until they are, quote unquote, better, or at least judged by a psychologist as no longer being likely to reoffend. When I do that, I'm in the Newton Correctional Facility 20 different times, sitting at a small table this close to someone, asking them to describe to me every criminal offense they committed against every one of their victims under oath. Usually these people are pedophiles. If you don't think that that's the kind of work that you carry with you over your years, think again. And that's true for almost every case. Even when it's someone who has just been defrauded, that changes people's lives. I had a case in Cedar Rapids with a guy named Leonard. Leonard was a bus driver. Really simple guy, had lived a very ordinary life, right? But a life that people should be proud of. Like, he was not a well-educated guy, but he was good enough at his finances and a good enough person that he, as a bus driver, was able to put away tens of thousands of dollars. And he wanted to start a college fund for his grandkids. What an honorable man. So he takes this money to the only person that he knows that does investments, a guy whose name is Noah, who goes to his church. Noah is a total con man, a complete scammer. And Leonard gives Noah all his money. Every penny of it, because Leonard doesn't know that you should diversify. Leonard doesn't know that. He just trusts Noah. And so we had a day in the Lynn County Courthouse in Cedar Rapids that's supposed to be a good day. It's sentencing. Noah is probably going to get sent to prison. And every victim in this case, there's about 40 of them, has an opportunity to provide a victim impact statement to let the court know what that case meant to them. And Leonard couldn't give his own victim impact statement because it broke him up too much. He had to have his daughter give it for him. And his statement was basically, I worked my whole life to put together this money. It's what I have to show for my life. And I wanted my grandkids to know that I had done something that took a long time, took my whole life to do, but I did it all for them because I love them that much. Sorry. And now I can't even buy them Christmas presents. So here's this old man who, on Christmas morning, looks at these grandkids that he's been putting all this money away for his entire life. And they don't know what's going on. All they know is Grandpa's not giving them a present. I mean, it crushed Leonard. And I didn't really think about that when I was thinking about being a criminal prosecutor. I thought, great, I'll be this crusader going in and righting wrongs, when the truth is you can't quite right the wrong. Noah went to prison, great. Noah belongs in prison. But it doesn't give Leonard his money back. It doesn't give him his self-respect back. It doesn't fix his life. We can't fix those things. So I left the office. I'm on your ballot in November as a state auditor candidate, which might sound super boring. I could go on for another hour about it's actually super exciting, but I know all of you want to get out of here. It's the office that does all the public corruption investigations in Iowa, and because I've been doing so much public corruption prosecution, I know very well about how much it could use new leadership, and that to me is an opportunity to do something more positive. But if I leave you with one thing, it's maybe the idea, I never really thought about that before, but I'm someone that is really animated by the idea of doing good, of having a positive impact. The skate park in Decorah is there because my junior and senior year, I spent getting it built. Basically organizing property owners and skateboarders in town, of which I was one, in order to get them to do that. So I got to grow up watching my little cousins, Carl and Eric Sand are my cousins. They grew up skating there. My friends still skate there. And that experience to me really informed a lot of what I wanted to do. And I'm not standing up here, I guess, saying follow your passion, which I think is a little head in the clouds, but try to find something that fits who you are fundamentally. Because after 6 years of doing criminal prosecution, I really realized that what I was doing wasn't going to keep me. It was too depressing, it was too dark, and it really limited your ability to do anything positive, because all you can ever do really is take something terrible and make it less bad, if that makes sense. I don't know how concrete that advice is, but I hope that some of you find it useful, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear from you, Rob. So we'll hang out down here. If you have any questions in person, come on down. and we'll see you on Thursday.